Um, Apart from having been raised in a kind of a Gandhian utopian place, Sevagram in the centre of India, where, well, actually urbanism was the enemy. You have to remember that there's a lot of Gandhian thought in which urbanism is impossible. It's not just something to be done well. It's wrong. So it was a while before I actually became an urbanist, fast forward many years later, having done practice in the UK for 10 years, I went back to India and did some research which turned into a PhD about a phenomenon that actually is a running theme in these kinds of discussions about urbanization around the world. And the theme is, to what extent can Western models serve a purpose in these other contexts? And that goes up and down, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But when I first got involved, very quickly I remember thinking or writing that actually the kind of study that I was trying to do in India was like playing chess in the middle of a football pitch, in which an extremely violent and ill-disciplined game of football was underway, and it was completely incongruous. And yet there were people trying to do that. In the meanwhile, the city was expanding at something like half a kilometre a year, basically going past you, as you try to work out what the future might be. And now, these 30 years later, that was 31 years ago I started that, and got PhD in 1988. It's even more like that. I think that what's unfolded is even more extreme. And the theme of what needs to be learned and from where has been consistent throughout. People before me had come studied in the UK, gone back with ideas, decided they were wrong, had an extreme reaction to any Western idea whatsoever, found that didn't work either because the world had moved on. Then they tangled and back and forth, and we are where we are today. And I think, however, we have, I think, to be very conscious of the appropriateness of the solution and have the humility in both directions. In this, I find Nick's optimism and rationalism. It doesn't ever give in to any kind of irrational kind of culture-based thinking. It seems to me, it's very if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do. It's very uplifting, and so I think today's session is very welcome for that. I'm just going to set the scene very, very briefly with just a glimpse of some of the work I did, and it's actually, in a sense, not so much about planning cities. It's actually about the urban fabric itself. I'm an architect, although I've become involved in urbanism, and I've done things like be part of the trustees of the Centre for Cities, and been very much involved in econometrics and all those things. In the end, urban form and where people actually live and the neighbourhoods they live in and their environment is my key concern. Anyway, what I had noticed out of train windows is the way that there was actually an urban form, and you also see this in classical texts and others, which had been almost consistently developed for 5,000 years in India and North India, in the hot and dry climates of North India, all the way from Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, the Indus Valley civilizations, right to the present almost. And that within the last 50, 60 years, as it then was, and actually more since independence, that form had not only been completely abandoned as a model for the future, but actually was being demolished. And in the old city of Delhi, for example, those old havelis, as they were called, of the wealthy or not so wealthy families, were being turned into warehouses and such like. Is this changing? Yeah. You can use the... Oh, great. Great. Fantastic. So very, very quickly, it's entirely about form. This is how the old cities look. The ground is remade at roof level. A pigeon fancier. We met somebody who learned to play cricket up there. This is an extraordinarily mixed, amazingly multivalent kind of space. There are occasionally trees in courtyards. The there's a lot of mutual overshadowing of buildings. It deals with the climate very, very well. People are able to exist without air conditioning. And of course, it is hot. It's uncomfortable. Nobody claims it is anything other. But it worked for a long time. It had extended families. It had its own logic. And this paradigm was entirely abandoned for something which is almost the opposite, where the tree, instead of being in the city is amongst trees, and that's the kind of paradigm. It has large monofunctional roads and in complete contrast. And this is, by the way, I'm making no value judgments at this point, to the heterogeneous, multi-use city. Actually, this is a British road, as it happens, in Shah Jahanabad, and you can see it had neat pavements made in the presumably the hope that people might walk on the pavements and vehicles might be on the road. But that's not how life's not like that. It doesn't make sense. So people appropriate and use it, and I can tell you a whole story about this shot, but I won't because we haven't got the time. But it's actually the most extraordinary density of multiple functions. It's ceremonial when it needs to be on the right. It's utilitarian when it needs to be on the left, entirely interchangeably, in contrast to the ceremonial axial roots expressive of temporal power of a colonial administration whose habits linger very strongly. The streets are full of kind of a expressive individualism in the villas, villa-type blocks that clamour for attention amongst each other and are built by individuals in the more wealthy South Delhi colonies, in contrast to the equally wealthy or merchants' havelis in the old city, which, although they are very individual, they have the individuality of faces, in a way, to my mind, i.e. they're each different, but however they seem to share a kind of typology which helps to make the urban realm. And I think that's the key thing, is that these are not only houses which work brilliantly in climate, but they made the urban realm. And the courtyard, of course, was a key to that, in contrast to the expression of the villa typology, where this image is the image that sells the place. You have your house, there's the car. Greenery is very important. There's a kind of a freedom. This is associated with a kind of what the word kulapan was used over and over again. It means openness, kulapan. Everything is open. It's as if the air itself has been made more available. There's a kind of a strong, when people talked about why they liked this, it was very strongly felt. And there was a lamentation about the old villa typology, but it was half-hearted. So it was very interesting, and I won't then go on to any conclusions from this, but just to say this is what fascinated me. Here's a view from within so on your left hand is sort of a jharoka, a sort of balcony, which is neither in the street nor in the house, in between, and this is on the right, a view from within it, looking out to the house. And this plays so many functions. It gives you privacy and yet openness and so on. Whereas actually the balcony, of course, survives, but in a completely different way as an expression of connection, as strong as possible with openness and greenery and so on. So on the left, the urban typology of Shah Jahanabad, and you might see a little figure ground drawing of a house in there. It's exactly the same scale. On the right-hand side is a house in a New Delhi colony, and you can see the difference in densities. But in addition to that, the house on the left would have been occupied by maybe 35 people in an extended family over 5 stories. The house on the right is occupied by a nuclear family of 5 or 6 and servants. So it was a fascinating thing, and it can be summarized in this diagram, which has been used before by people like land use and built form studies to discuss perimeter planning, but actually it shows that the extraordinary cultural contrast between these two. So my question really was, what is it that stops us recruiting the kind of the genius of typologies that are built up in a place? Why can't we recruit them to solve problems of today? And I found some answers to that, but that will take too long, and I hope that it's something just to log for the rest of the day. Thank you.
Excellent.